recording, Adam screen sharing. So this will probably be the final one we'll do tonight. I'll get Adam to read, and yeah.
Excellent. Play number 8, Valerio versus Papirio. Papirio and Valerio come together in an empty field to settle a dispute of honor with the sword alone. Both of them place themselves at the same time, low in step, on the inside guard. Papirio, as the actor, begins by lowering the point of his sword a little below that of Valerio and beating it somewhat. He always pulls the hand either in a dritti, reversi, tondi, squalambrati, or fidente, always throwing such attacks with art and deception. Those are all different angles for those. By the way, Valerio, for his part, to defend himself from these attacks, turns the hand of the sword on one side or the other, answering the enemy with similar attacks, taking care not to be the first to move. So Papirio has to wait for the parry and cannot hurt him. Papirio, as soon as he perceives this, returns to his usual guard, holding his hand firmly and with much art, feints with the point of his sword. During his feints, he does not move away from the enemy's sword by a knife's edge. So that's a euphemism for a tiny distance, like a hair's breadth. Valerio, with a similar way of feinting, defeats the feints of the adversary, preventing such feints. He does not find the time to strike, but takes care only to defend himself. Papirio then is anxious to enter. He feints to want to come in quickly on the outside, finding the enemy's sword behind the behind the middle, so on the back half of the sword, so that his point almost touches Valerio's chest. He defends himself with this attack. Valerio, finding the point close to his chest, has no time to shake the sword point. He turns his whole vita quickly, carrying the back leg, and puts his double A in front of the sword, so the front half of the sword, in front with the sword, defending himself with agility. In this way, he carries the point out and quickly responds to Papirio with a dritto fendente to his head. The latter, with great effort and speed, is covered under the sword with a parry.
I love that, just the last one, the fendente to the head, the latter is covered with great effort and speed. Just because the sort of, it's always a wonderful sort of technique to just throw this like cut straight down the middle like this, just fuck off, leave me alone cut, which of course is usually covered with great effort and speed, where someone basically has to do this panic parry, which causes them to back off. I don't know, that was my favourite bit of that section, I guess. So yeah, so does anyone other than me have any comments that they want to make just before I launch into any of my thoughts? This doesn't need to be just me speaking. So is there anything else anyone wants to say?
This one is, I think this play is mainly focused at teaching the student about feints and how you can feint with a cut or you can feint with the point. And it may not emphasize it or illustrate it particularly well, but in the order of events the order of things that he teaches, that he describes later on in the discussion, this is the point where he introduces feints with the point and feints with the cut. So I believe that's the focus of this play.
Yeah. Also, actually,
from someone,
and then also
background, like you guys done set off everything that I've done, I'm never going to consider it, but for me, it seems like he's stepping to his left to carry the point to his outside, and then he can deliver the attack. So he's not only parrying the attack, but he's taking himself out of the line of the attack, so that he then fronts off and comes in the middle again at the head, which is where that downward attack would be. The other sword is going He's outside. That's how I see it. I'm more from an unarmed combat type thing, but
I mean, I do think another like some of the things that you get or you learn from unarmed combat are quite relevant here because like in just this section he describes moving the body offline either with footwork, and it seems like there is a bigger emphasis in this on defending.
He takes it offline there, and then he can.
Yeah, there seems to be a bigger emphasis defending by moving the body rather than just putting the sword in the way.
Little attacks and this, and then all of a sudden it's like, I'm here because he's got the strong point. That's my take on it. As I say, I'm looking at it from a non-fences point of view, probably.
Yeah, well, like I mean, I do think like having different perspectives on this material, like or any material, is quite valuable. But yeah, and I think like because it seems like nearly all of his defenses, or not all, but a lot of the defenses are coupled with moving the body. Also seems that last part.
Well, the early one was going offline, stepping to the inside for an attack offline. Now he's defending offline.
Interesting. Yeah, one of the things I also kind of noted about this section was like the first bit where he's describing the attacker is just throwing all of these different attacks, and the defender is just kind of sitting there. And the attacker keeps going until he decides that basically direct attacks essentially not going to work, or just throwing an attack without a beat or some kind of preparatory motion is just not going to work. Found that quite interesting.
The other side of that first bit is with the defenses, where he says, the opponent waits for the attack to come in and waits for the parry. So it infers that you don't just stick the parry in the way straight away, you wait for it. Or if I got that backwards.
Yeah, just...
No, that's right. And then when it comes in, he moves to the side, it goes offline. That's when the direct downward strike would be applicable.
Yeah, but there's also that sense of pausing. So in 19th century systems, there's two types of return attacks, two sort of things you do when you're returning. One is you parry and you basically return as quick as you can, usually just with an extended arm. You don't actually use any footwork, in the hope that you'll catch your opponent while they're still at the end of their lunge. But the other way to do it is you deliberately wait for about just a quarter of a second. And this usually does mean that you're going to have to put in a bit of footwork to actually reach your opponent when you do your return attack. But you have the advantage that you have the advantage of seeing what they're going to do next, what they're going to do to try and cover themselves as they get out. So it seems like with this, a lot of what he's suggesting is you want to actually know what your opponent is doing after they've made the attack, so that you can then, and it's almost like the way he feints, where he says you feint so that you can kind of see or get your opponent doing something, see what they're going to do. So with this, you're covering with a feint. Your return attack is covered with a feint, except you're not actually doing anything. You're just waiting to see what your opponent does, because your opponent has to do something. That makes sense.
There seemed to be a bit of make a pattern, break a pattern kind of thing of like, oh, we're doing these really small movements, we are fencing at each other, until finally, no, now I'm just going to get you. I've finally lulled you into an actual decent attack. Now I can just get you. And that was pretty neat, sorry.
Yeah.
The narrative of these fights is really enjoyable.
You will find just the sequence of events throughout all of the duels is, this guy tries to do this, but this guy counters it this way, and then he tries this, but that didn't work, and then he tries this, but that didn't work. And then he tries this. And that guy screwed up somehow, so he died.
That's every bout I've ever had.
Sorry if I missed it. I must have when you were reading it out. But just to, what was the debile? Sorry, in the final paragraph, carrying the leg back and puts his debile in front with the sword. I must have missed it when you.
So the debile is the point end of the sword. The mezzo being the middle, and the fort, or the forte, being the strong hilt-end blade.
Okay, cool.
So you're just kind of, so just kind of basically tucking the sword in the center line. Nothing.
Yeah, and that leads on to behind the mezzo and in front of the mezzo being different halves of the sword that he talks about. Just another weird terminology thing.
Yeah, so I noticed that in your preface. The sword is really quite heavily broken down into, which bit is what.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So, does anyone have any comments? Any more comments on this section?
Well, just so I can, because I'm trying to visualize this final little encounter. So after the unsuccessful feints, Papirio feints to the outside. Valerio on the inside, I assume. I assume that he's meant to be the inside guard. Oh no, hold on. That's from the outside. I'm just trying to think. So, is the idea that as Valerio is sort of like in the same sense as when we were talking about drawing from the scabbard by taking a large step backwards, and that changes everything about where your sword is. It gives him the distance so that his sword is no longer, well, the point is no longer at his chest, and his sword is still in position. I'm just not sure exactly. That's what I'm imagining it as, but I'm not sure because it doesn't explain.
My interpretation of that is that Paprio comes in and it says finding the sword behind the mezzo. Now, the word used for finding is trovere, which is a kind of an early form of stringere or blade advantage. And so if he's to come in, but then he comes onto the sword with blade advantage, Valerio then can't shake under the sword because it's a too big a motion. So he decides to just move and carries the back leg. So I assume a kind of incortada to avoid his entire vita. And that should shift his Devilero's point with the sword to defend himself.
Yeah, okay, that's the movement that I was thinking.
Yeah, so just to demonstrate this, just to make sure no one's at all lost. So you're suggesting that a lot of it is an incortada, which is that, incortada.
Maybe not quite so big, but yeah.
Usually stick your point out at the other person. And then blade, I don't know really how I could display blade advantage because a lot of that is just getting leverage on your opponent's sword, like positioning your sword so you have the leverage to just basically push them aside. If that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. So Lovino has two types of plays that he describes in more detail later. Those being the plays of force and the plays of agility. And the plays of force, of course, moving your opponent's sword by beats or pushing, and those of agility, which is mainly moving out of the way with your body.
Cool.
So he kind of has those two fields that he juggles.
That's cool. That's really cool.
No, he talks about them more in his discussion, so I suggest you read that because it is quite an interesting read.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Alright, cool. Yeah, no, definitely, and I think definitely it's going to be interesting sort of going back and reading it, sort of certainly after this discussion, and kind of having a bit of a better idea of, or like a bit of a better idea of how the system kind of comes together. Cool. So does anyone have any other comments on this? If not, probably ended here because it is getting on a bit. So first off, before we go, I'd really like to thank Adam for not just for coming along tonight and reading out for us, although that was fantastic, but also for doing the translation and translating manual. Just sort of, I think a lot of what kind of got me interested in this is a friend of mine said, "Oh, this is a manual that has only just been translated and it's really cool, so go check it out." And yeah, big thank you for Adam for translating, for being here as well, and to giving your insights, because those were really, really great and really enjoyed those, and also for reading out and for translating. Yeah, thank you, Adam.
Yeah, cheers. Putting the H in here.
You can put that on your business card. Adam K puts the H in here. Cool. So normally what we do is we stream, and anyone who wants to hang around, just have a chat, talk a bit more detail about the manual, is more than welcome to do so. Obviously, there's people watching the recording at home who won't be privy to the chat. But yeah, like a big part of this is not just so that we can still do sword lessons in isolation, but also so we can still kind of talk to each other in isolation, because isolation is quite isolating. So thank you everyone for coming. Hopefully I'll see you next week. We're going to be doing, the Old Sword Club is doing seminars and workshops this time every week until isolation ends. Next week is me doing a workshop on cutlass fencing, so like 19th century cutlass method. And then after that, I'm not sure, but just keep an eye on the Old Sword Club on Facebook to find out what we're doing next. So yeah, thank you all for coming, and well, I'd say goodbye, but we're all going to hang around and talk anyway. So yeah, let's just hang around and talk.